Next topic would be when we do have this sort of system set up, how do we want to roll that out to members of boards we appoint or new employees, for example? What sorts of processes do we want in place for that? And also if we have to move, take action on any of those policies, et cetera. And so I also had onboarding new appointees, employees, council members. Should this be part of our onboarding process? By onboarding, I mean like an orientation process. And what should we include about ethics and expectations when we are doing that sort of thing? So I just wanted to kind of delve into this, and I know Jonathan had sent out some information about what's already part of our handbook, et cetera. So I thought we'd start with that, take a look at that, and work our way through this. And I think you're going to pull it up on screen, right? Sally, I think we're going to have Jonathan share his screen. So you should be able to see it on yours as well.
Okay. I'm not seeing it on the screen.
Yeah. Give me a second, Sally. I didn't have it up here. I'll have to find
He's
it.
getting there. There's a state code of ethics, employee handbook. We have something in there. I think you also sent us the South Bend one, was it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we get the technology to work.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Can you see it now, Sally?
Yes, I can. That's wonderful.
All right, so this one is about ethics and conflict of interest in terms of employee behavior and conduct.
So, well, this one, the one that I sent from the handbook, as you read in the, I think it's in the first paragraph, it does say that this section applies both to employees. I know it's elected officials. Forget if it says appointed.
Yeah, it says all elected and appointed officials, employees, volunteers, and others who participate in our government are required to subscribe to this code, understand how it applies to their specific responsibilities, and practice those core values in their work. Because we value the public's confidence and trust in our services and its decision makers, our character and behaviors must meet the most demanding ethical standards and demonstrate the highest level of achievement in following this code. I think this may have been added when we did the, was it, I can't remember the HR consultant we worked with.
Yeah, the last time we did an update.
Yeah, because I think it wasn't there prior to his, so I want 5-6 years ago maybe. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think 17.
Yeah.
15%.
Sounds.
Yeah, I think Sally, you were on council. Bill might have been.
Yeah.
Toward the end of your term, maybe. Anyway, so this one talks about honest integrity, to act with honesty, make decisions for the public's best interest, even when they may not be popular, engage in any business that would be directly or indirectly inconsistent with the conscientious performance of our public duties. Do not engage in those. Make no private promises of any kind that may unduly influence our public duties. Accept the responsibility to expose corrupt practices or behaviors, and, where empowered to do so, protect any public employee from retaliation who's exposed corrupt practices and or behaviors. Then there's a section on respect and civility, to treat each other as you would wish to be treated. Those are pretty much all the golden rule ones. And then there's an accountability responsibility one, to not participate in any decisions where we have a conflict of interest or from which our family, business, or professional associations may personally benefit. Do not use our positions, public property, or public resources for the personal benefits of ourselves, our family, or business or professional associates. To never solicit or accept any favor or benefit from our family, businesses, professional associates, or others that might be construed as influencing the performance of our public duties. To make full public disclosure of the nature of any conflict of interest prior to any action taken. I think, didn't that also become law, Jim, where you have to fill out
Yes.
the conflict of interest form every year that Karen has us fill out?
That is correct. There's conflict of interest form that you should fill out. Absolutely.
To avoid disclosing or abusing the information that we gain by virtue of our position for the personal benefit of ourselves, our family, businesses, or professional associates. To not engage in direct competition with or respective town while we are employer, elected official, or department head. To support the public's right to know the truth and encourage diverse and civil public debate in the decision-making process. That one for me is really big because I think that's why I push so hard on public involvement before we make big decisions. Then there's a fairness and justice section to promote non-discrimination in our decision-making, to recognize the function of government to serve the best interest of citizens, to use our authority to promote the efficient and effective delivery of public service, to refrain from proposing services where adequate resources are not available, and to work to remedy the imbalance where inadequate resources adversely affect the best interest of the citizens. That to refrain from proposing services where adequate resources are not available, is that where we as employees are not to like recommend a friend or something? Not sure I follow that.
That's a good question, Jimmy. I'm not sure.
That one's
really
kind
dealt
of
with that one
a
before.
little bit vague.
That's the closest I could think of, right?
So after listing all of those, there's B, C, and D say behavior inconsistent with the values set forth in this code may be redressed by the traditional instruments of governance, including state law, ordinances, and work rules. No employee should use his or her position with the town for personal gain, nor shall he or she engage in any business or transaction which is in conflict with the proper discharge of his or her duty. No employee shall engage in, accept private employment or render services for private interests when such employment or service is incompatible with the proper discharge of his or her official duties or would tend to impair his or her independent judgment or action and the performance of his or her duties. Those last three statements are very much geared at employees, whereas the introduction is geared at everyone who does work for the town in any way, shape, or form. So any thoughts, input, comments on this that already exist? Are we following these policies as a general rule? And are the employees, us as appointed officials, volunteers who work for us and participate in government, subscribing to this code, I guess is the question of the day. Did you guys know this code existed?
I have just a couple of comments.
Uh-huh.
Under the accountability and responsibility section, it's generally thought that if you fill out the conflict of interest form, that sort of gives you clearance to then go ahead and vote on a particular matter that, theoretically could be sort of a violation of what we would think would be a conflict of interest. And the state code pretty much clearly says, look, if you've got a conflict of interest, you're supposed to stand down. And I think my advice has always been to all of you that if that's the case, that's what should happen. And I know most of you have done that in the past. If there's somewhere there's going to be a gain involved, either directly or indirectly, you are not participating. But that isn't necessarily reflected in your code as it sits right now. Another, I guess, and to some degree, if you look at some of the state ethics code and you also look at this code that was sent by South Bend, they are more specific when it comes to like gift rules and some of the other things, conflict of interest and some of those things. Now, the state thing doesn't have much bearing probably on, I mean, there's a bunch of rules in there about post-employment restrictions and things like that. I'm not sure that that's going to have a lot of bearing here. Although it may, I guess. I suppose if you're a council member and you want to go to work as, for the park, you may want to give some consideration to that, but it's probably not so important in the local setting as it might have been at the other one. One thing, as it comes to the end, that item B, behavior inconsistent with set forth in the code may be redressed by the traditional instruments of governance, including state law ordinances and work rules. I would say that would be an area that you may want to consider some elaboration on. I don't think you have a very good process in place to deal with concerns, complaints, and things like that.
Yeah, it seems really vague too, like, oh, you might have to answer to a state law, an ordinance, or what's a work rule exactly?
Yeah.
Is that like a rule that says you can or can't do this?
Yeah, I think that for that part, it's probably applying to the employees, right? Since some of this section applies to.
The other one that seemed missing that you brought up, I think, is the gift policy. That doesn't seem to be addressed, at least it did.
Your ethics code really doesn't talk much about any kind of a gift policy.
Yeah.
Karen, do you remember, is it anywhere else? Because this is just 2 pages out of our handbook. I know we talked about it during.
We had a pretty extensive conversation.
But
Because in that, I made some changes to that, but I don't know. that
Yeah,
had-
I feel like it's addressed somewhere in there, but it might not be. Anyway, I could send that to everybody afterwards.
I do know.
I know we talked about it, but whether it made it in there or not, now I kind of
I
forget.
think statute has a gift policy code, does it not? Because I know as a consultant, I cannot bill a gift that's valued at more than $25.
That's a state policy though.
Right.
Because we have state.
Right, I'm
contracts
just
with-
saying there is a state policy on it. And I only know that because that's a Troyer Group thing too, that we don't gift elected officials as a company. We don't even do meals.
Yeah, and really the $25 rule is a little bit, that at the state level, that's even been done away with that. If you took me as a state employee out to lunch, you shouldn't buy my dinner, no matter how cheap it might be. Now, the $25 under the state comes up where there's where they're having, for instance, a seminar and it's sponsored.
It's like a drawing
by,
and.
somebody, and everybody there is eligible to get something to drink or eat or whatever else. They didn't go so far as to say you can't do that, but and then the same thing I saw there's conversation and I think the South Bend deal about mementos and souvenirs, and they put a specific, in the state code it's just nominal value, and that in the South Bend code they actually said I think under $25.
Yeah, right.
So that's to some degree better, is they're specifically defining what those mementos might be. The interesting thing too on the state level is the state representatives don't have to follow these ethics rules. It's just basically for the administrative branch and all the employees and all the appointed people and everything else. So our state reps, Jack Jordan or whoever's down here, I think he's just,
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, he doesn't have to abide by any of these things, but And the same, and it's the same for the governor, except he's the only one in the administrative branch that doesn't have to. But,
Why is that?
they,
I mean, that's
yeah, they
kind of
wrote the
weird.
rules.
It's like congressional benefits. I mean, it's like,
Right. Well, I mean, to see in the handbook, I know when we put this in there, and I remember the consultant bringing up this specific line about appointed officials, employees, volunteers, and elected. I'm not sure we inform our people that this exists in that sense, like when we're onboarding a new person coming in. I don't think in the time you guys have joined council that that's probably been a known to you.
Yeah, every time you make an appointment to any of your commissions, your plan commissions, whatever
This should
else,
be part of it.
they should know that they need to abide by your ethics. And at the state level, everyone is required to take training. Everyone signs a form that says they're familiar with the ethics code and you know, vet it and will abide by it. And I don't, do you guys have your handbook signed by new employees?
Employees, yes. Appointments, we have
Probably not.
a book that we typically give them, right, and this page has not been included in the past, so that'll be something
Yeah,
we can
and
add.
I think that's
Mhm.
something that
Yeah.
should be included.
You know, when you were talking about how we could be more specific on that point B, which I agree with, I think we need to think that one through. This whole section on accountability and responsibility, to not participate in decisions where we have a conflict of interest or from which our family business or professional associate can personally benefit. So do we need to define conflict of interest? Because I know what we fill out for the state. Like I work at Troyer Group, so I'm obviously not, I don't even want to be present on the vote for that stuff or scoring bid sheets and stuff like that. And I used to be involved in those things until I went to work with them. But I always recuse myself from Boys and Girls Club. That's something the town has contributed to from a budget standpoint. So, and I'm asking that because this has come up with all of us, I think. I know it came up with CRC, it's come up with town council. If we are serving on some other board, by default, do we have a conflict of interest in voting on monies going to that board? Do we need to be more specific about defining that?
Probably you do, yes. If you want to address that. I mean, it says from which our family, business, or professional associates may personally benefit. But
So like my professional associates on the board or the employees of Boys and Girls Club benefit if the town gives their budget money. That's how I look at it anyway, but it obviously doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit my mom or sister or, you know, Jonathan, my professional associate. But I justify recusing myself because it does benefit the same organization I'm raising money for. I mean, I do fundraising, I fill out grant forms for them. So in a way it benefits me that I don't have to raise that X amount of dollars. You know, but I mean, I know this has come up with you with Develop Culver and Main Street. If we have a board member, if Rich is serving on the CRC or, you know, Bill is serving on Boy Scouts or whatever, it sounds like two separate types of organizations, but are they really? If we have, do we fill out a conflict of interest? Like, I don't think I usually put down that I work at Troyer Group, but I don't put,
I think you put down.
did I put Boys and Girls Club? Okay.
I mean, I put all those boards on.
You put all the boards down?
Yeah, the partnership with the code, I mean, all of those things are on it. But I think the way, at least the state statute is written, the conflict is defined as having a personal gain.
financial interest.
A financial interest, right. So I mean, if we want to write it in addition to that, we certainly could. But the way
Exactly.
the way the state law, I think is written currently is you have to have a financial interest. So this Troyer Group, if they get additional business as an employee of that, it definitely benefits you. From the Boys and Girls Club side, I mean, this is squishy benefit that the Boys and Girls Club does better, and that makes you feel good because you're contributing your time. to advance their efforts. But we don't get a financial gain from it necessarily.
But you may have a personal benefit from it, which is the way the code reads right now.
Well, that's what we
Right.
need to define that as what the person, I think, because I think that's squishy too. It's like, so it's, you know,
I'd also argue based on what's in our handbook that my professional associates benefit. Because they don't have to raise that money because the town gave it to them. So in a way, it gets a little less squishy.
Yeah, well, you're gonna need to define professional associate probably as well, because I'm not.
Yeah, that
I
feels
would-
really
I
vague,
would
right?
take professional associates more as, and people that are generating business kind of stuff
Yeah.
rather than.
I'm thinking like coworkers at Troy or
Yeah.
someone else at your
Yeah,
firm
not
or something like
necessarily
that. That's,
Your.
A nonprofit
your-
associate.
yeah,
Co-owner.
nonprofit volunteers. I'm not
Yeah.
sure nonprofit volunteer would, in my mind, would be under the definition of professional associate.
Okay.
but if, I think I'm not opposed to our rewriting it with those terms in it, but then I think we have to be careful about what we can do. So for example, the visitor center gets a grant from the town. If the Boys and Girls Club gets a grant from the town, we can't pass a budget because Bill, you, and me all have to recuse ourselves from the vote. And so there's only only two board members or town council members who would be able to vote on the budget. And I don't know that that's a.
For which one? For Boys and Girls
No,
Club?
if
Oh.
we put a grant in the budget, the annual budget for some of those organizations, then when we pass, when the budget comes up for a vote, then do all of us have to recuse ourselves because there's a remittance to those organizations?
I do it in the moment of I guess not necessarily in the budget, but during the budget session, I didn't want to weigh in on that.
Right.
Because we did have to make a decision about putting that in there.
Correct, and that's clear, but if it's in the whole budget, if you've got the whole budget that we took a vote on a couple of weeks ago, if there were grants in there to the library, to the Boys and Girls Club, to the visitor center.
Oh, like literally all five of us would eventually have to recuse ourselves, is what you're saying.
right.
That's what I think we have to be careful about. It's, writing so strictly that you're not being able to conduct a reasonable amount of business.
You're saying on the aggregate of it, everybody listed together rather than individually, like.
Well, but when we
Boys
pass,
and girls for she and I on Boys and Girls,
yes,
me in the library or something like that, and you on something, then we refuse, but as an aggregate, we wouldn't get anything passed.
that's sort of my
Right.
point, is that if it's all lumped into the budget is, if there's a motion that comes up to donate $10,000 to the Boys and Girls Club because they didn't have their auction this year, then the two of you would recuse yourself from that motion. But if in the budget, we have an allocation to give them free rent for something or, a grant for
We
something.
can still
In
pass
the
the
budget, you're
budget.
voting on the budget as a whole, you're not voting on a specific.
But those individual things are in there.
Individual, yeah.
Right.
So I mean,
But I think,
I'm not suggesting you can't
I
do
think
that,
the
but you
idea
should,
is to
but I think-
recuse yourself from the individual piece of that. So Bill and I just backed out of voting on that. The three of you approved it, so now it's in the budget. Once it's in there, you're voting on the whole big
You're voting on
picture.
the
And
budget
I'm
as a
fine
whole,
with that, I
yeah.
just think we need to
Yeah.
be sure to define that, otherwise you
Yeah.
trip over it later.
Well, and then maybe going forward, rather than saying specifically, we're donating X amount for the Boys and Girls Club, or X amount to this, you set aside and say, look, we're setting aside this amount of money for donations, and leave it at that, and then as the year progresses, then, the Boys and Girls Club should come in and make a pitch and ask for that donation, and then there's the opportunity to recuse yourself from a vote there, or the visitor center, or the library, or whomever. Maybe that's the way to go about it in the future.
Yeah, it gets tricky for me where I like that for the nonprofits. For the organizations that are not so much, that could get tricky because like visitor center, we've been given 12 or 14,000. It's significant enough to have a discussion at budget time. And ideally you want them coming in at that time to make their case for why they need taxpayer dollars. I think I'm following your logic on that.
You might give some thought to distinguishing between what I'm gonna call Boys and Girls Club, which is a nonprofit, which has got, you know, sort of goals that, you know, providing, you know, children's activities and services, as opposed to nonprofits like the Visitor Center that is sort of in a semi or quasi, you know, local government activity. You follow what I'm saying?
The distinction between charitable and not-for-profit.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say. Because like you did with the Marshall County Economic Development Corporation, you basically required, or we set up an agreement that, you know, we're going to pay them X number of dollars, which is really a donation, but we're expecting in return some deliverables, some services, and we try to define those to some extent.
Mhm.
And I'm not too sure if for those kinds of nonprofit organizations that are providing those kinds of services, that you might not be better off in having something specific on the signs.
Yeah, I really like that.
As opposed to the charitable things like the, you know, Boys and Girls Club. Well, we know what they're doing, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not really government functions that they're doing. I guess, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, basically, the contract with them is, we'll give you this grant or
I don't
donation
think you
and,
need anything with anything you do in the CRC, because it's set up by statute. But what else do you have? You've got the
Visitor Center.
you take your money to.
CRC funds projects as well, and sometimes they are organizations and not a project. Like Develop Culver
For specific.
or
projects.
Visitor Center, they
Well,
fund
see,
MC.
CRC may want to do that like we do with the EDC, is
Yeah.
have a service contract that says we're going to fund you X number of dollars, and we're expecting, what'd you say the name was? Or Develop Culver? I mean, is that kind of an economic development kind of thing?
It's Main Street.
It's Main
Oh,
Street.
Jim, could you use something like within the words of tax dollars, if you're receiving tax dollars?
Well, I mean,
The
even,
Boys and Girls Club doesn't receive,
yeah, they do. If we give them a donation, they're using.
well,
tax
it
dollars.
is, okay, but
Mhm.
I'm saying tax dollars from another end.
Yeah, there's, I mean, it depends on what, Karen can take it out of general fund or CCD,
Yeah, that's.
maybe not CCD, but like casino fund or,
Riverboat.
yeah.
Okay.
You might as well just assume it's all tax dollars.
You mean,
You might as well assume
It got
it's all
collected
tax dollars
somewhere.
Because you can't track
I
down.
understand.
but
I get you.
I mean, in the case that you're talking about, Bill, if, for example, the visitor center received innkeeper tax dollars,
Yeah,
which it does not, but if it did, then maybe that would be something that would, it's, you know.
well, it's not like the library, which is, you get tax dollars from, the county as well as, you got a, fund on a water bill maybe or something like that that's, giving you money. You're not in the water bill without,
Yeah, we can't
Explaining
use, we
myself.
can't use those revenues for anything other than the water though.
That's
Or,
right, yeah.
and same with sewer, so.
Who else do you give money to?
Well, sometimes it's not us, sometimes it is redevelopment. And I do think we need to apply all of this consistently, because we've had those questions come up. Even years ago, I can think of some times where redevelopment has funded a specific project and they're limited by their rules. So like, there's certain things they cannot fund.
I'm trying to think, I think the big ones, that's really it, isn't it? I mean, Boys and Girls Club have been pretty consistent on most of the years. I
Yeah,
think,
in most other cases, it's a vendor
Main Street and,
or a consultant.
You also have the facade program.
yeah.
That would,
Do you guys give any money to the Humane Society anymore?
Mm-mm.
Mm.
And
So I had to
they don't
list-
send a truck here or anything like that.
You know what?
They don't service this area either.
if you go to the annual financial report, I have to list all the entities outside of town government that we've given money to, so it would be the recipients of the facade program. This year it would be, it would also be NCDC. This year it'll be fairly long because we have all the people that we provided grant, all the small businesses that we provided grants to. So you can actually look on Gateway on the state website and get a listing of who the town has given money to.
Yeah. So when we were trying to score those grants, we recused ourselves from being a scorer if we, like in my case, the person leasing our building, I didn't want to review that
Yeah, you would have
application.
to do that.
So I put that on Karen and Jonathan and Rich, and same thing with you. You may have had one, I can't remember, but it's out of that list of people, all those businesses that applied. But I think that's recusing yourself from Boys and Girls Club to give taxpayer dollars to that club. My same question is, if it's not a charitable organization and it is a governance type like Main Street Visitor Center, MCEDC, we should probably be, one, requiring a contract, but we have to do that even for the nonprofits, right? The charitable nonprofits. But two, if I'm on one of those organizations on their board, is it a conflict of interest for me to vote to support one of their projects? And that's where my view on that, I think, is different than maybe Rich's view on that, maybe different than the Bills and Sally, I don't know. I think we need to, what is our view? My view is you should recuse yourself. But I know Rich has a debate, another side to that view, because all of us belong to numerous organizations at times.
I mean, my belief is that if we wrote the rules that way, then I would have no problem with it. But the way the rules are written currently, there is no personal financial gain from being a volunteer board member and supporting an initiative that comes before whatever your legislative group is, whether it's town council or CRC. If there's no gain, personal gain in approving that or supporting it, according to the current rules, I don't see it as a conflict. If we write the rules such that it is, then that's fine.
And I think Rich's definition of personal gain is financial. My definition of that is you are personally gaining your organization or the projects of that organization. So I have a different view of it.
But again, with the, is there something wrong with the Boys and Girls Club advancing itself or Main Street or Develop Culver or the library or whatever the group may be, because that organization is moving forward with fulfilling their mission, which is to provide service to the community or to provide business development to the community at no cost. I guess that's the question that I would raise. I understand what you're saying about the professional gain on it. The organization does benefit from it. But even if it's a direct pass-through cost, so one of the examples with Develop Culver and the contracts were that the CRC would reimburse Develop Culver for working with the businesses to develop a website for a maximum, I think it was $5,000 for 4 to 6 businesses.
It was initially for 6 businesses, $5,000 up to $5,000 within 4 weeks of when the contract was signed.
And so then what was billed back to CRC were the costs for the consultant that was working with them, and then the staff hours in getting that implemented also. So it wasn't like there was an outright, $5,000 and then Develop Culver, only spent $4,000 and.
I mean, I can see how in that scenario, Rich doesn't have personal financial gain, but the money pays staff in that situation, right? And a potential consultant. So the organization has some financial gain. Do you know what I mean? I guess this is where I'm stuck, because I don't think it's illegal.
Is it,
to
do
vote.
they have a board? Is there a board?
Yes.
And are the meetings open to the public?
No, it's a
I don't know. I don't
501c3,
think they
so.
publish their meetings, do you?
Pardon me?
It's, I mean, it's a 501c3, no, I mean, they're not generally
not-
being
it's not
open
a-
to
it's
public.
not-
So
Yeah,
they're not
Not regulated by any
operating
means.
it's a not, right,
as a governmental function.
right.
Right.
Well, and one of the things that was included in the sort of the state thinking, and if you saw it in the ethics code, is kind of this appearance of, impropriety, or kind of a chance that, it might, it may not be wrong, but it looks like it could be, or whatever. So that's kind of a governance rule that we always also included if we, didn't think that it spelled out specifically enough that there was a wrongdoing going on. If it smelled bad, it was kind of like, well, you should have, done something a little different. Now, punishment wasn't nearly as bad, but, I mean, I guess that's another consideration that you might want to take a look at. How does it look to the general public of what's going on?
You're saying, does it pass the smell test?
Yeah, it doesn't pass the smell test.
Mm-hmm. And should we be specific
agree
about what that smell test
I agree
is?
along those lines, If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, is it a
Yeah,
duck?
yeah.
I see both sides of it. I mean, because none of these things are very clearly defined. I guess if we want to define it, we should. Because right now, you can point to all the language here, and it's a little vague and iffy. It literally does say to not participate in any decision where we have a conflict of interest or from which our family, business, or professional associates may personally benefit. That's even more vague than financially benefit, because, I don't know.
Yeah, looking at the South Bend one, I know looks like they define relative. I was thinking they define personal benefit, but I'm not seeing it now. But I mean, yeah, I think some of those items that there's some disagreement on, we just need to come to an agreement on how we define those terms.
Jonathan, have you seen anything specific as to the application that we're talking about? So a council member, an elected or appointed official, being on a non-for-profit board and an issue, how does?
Yeah.
Specific to that?
So I have not reviewed a ton. I think the ones I've reviewed are the ones in front of you, our own South Bends in the state.
Okay.
And from what I've gathered, I think most of them are defining the personal benefit as the financial to you specifically or your work associates. I don't think most are expanding it out to a board benefiting that you might be on, but I can keep looking. Like I said, these are the ones I studied the closest. I'm sure there probably are some that look at it that way, but that's not what I saw so far.
And I'm not sure that I've seen many like that either.
Yeah, that's my impression, but.
So by work associates, in that case, if they were paying just a consultant, who Rich doesn't even know the consultant in that scenario, it would be okay. But if it's to pay one of the employees of that organization, would that be different? Because that's the work associate, or?
And in this case, the work associate would not have had those hours were not related to this task. So it isn't like
Right.
they're supplementing 25% of their salary for something
No,
else.
again, the way I interpret it, and I think others have, is that the work associate is, if you're in a firm where you're all relatively equal and someone that you're working with actually benefits, or your boss benefits, or some direct financial benefit to your company's bottom line, versus if you're on a nonprofit and you're on the board and one of the employees is going to get paid for it. I do think that's looked at a little bit differently.
And
That
see,
makes
that's
sense.
where it might be helpful to have this agreement like we had with EDC, that if you're giving to this non-for-profit board and it's paying employees, you can just put in there, paying employees to do whatever it is that they're doing that's of benefit to the community.
Judy, when you were on
Mhm.
Marshall County Community Development,
Community Foundation?
Community
Community
Foundation?
yeah, now in that case, do you know if they have any I mean, because they have an open.
Yeah, when it
besides the
comes to
employees.
giving grants, I was on the grant committee, and if you were from the community where the grant was going, you left the room while they discussed it.
Okay.
Well, if you were on their board, so like when Boys and Girls Club would apply for a foundation grant, I left the room and then someone would come get me and say, we're done.
Okay.
But if there was another Culver organization applying that I wasn't sitting on the board, I was allowed to sit there and I could even vote. In general, most of the people I think voted on their own community stuff, as long as you're not on one of the so, and they literally
Well,
make you walk
see, and
out.
that's a
You
good
can't
example.
stay
The
there.
idea is that if you were sitting there and participating as a board member for the Culver Boys and Girls Club, you'd be wanting to tell the community foundation, yeah, let's give them some money, and the more the merrier.
Yeah,
And that's the, and it's not necessarily a financial gain for you, but,
yeah.
you know.
It's an influence you're
Yeah.
having.
It's the influence that you get.
Yeah. And so, and a
And that's
lot
the
of,
part I think you want to address would be.
yeah, that you have to admit you have that. Well, and even recusing yourself, you're still in the room when we recuse ourselves. So, you
I
know,
like the idea of the separation. That's an important element when it comes to ethics.
I
because,
do too.
I mean, you know, okay, well, everybody knows Jenny's a fan of the Culver Boys and Girls Club, so, you know, if I got an extra dollar,
If you
even
sit
though
there and
it's more,
nod your head.
let's give it to her. But, you know, it's a little easier to say no if you're not sitting there in the room and they, okay.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe we should do that as a practice.
Maybe we should do what?
Maybe we should make that a practice, like at budget time, if we're discussing, Bill and I sit on that board, so we should leave the room, so the three remaining don't have to feel the pressure of our presence, like, wonder if they're gonna give the Boys and Girls Club money.
Right.
But as long as we don't lose a quorum when you do that.
Yeah.
That's,
Right,
so I mean, it
Well-
sounds like there's only Bill and I there and Foodie left.
you may be
So-
SOL though in that case,
Yeah.
right?
I don't know, or defer it or continue,
Yeah,
Well, and, you know, maybe that's okay. I mean, do we really want 3 board members of the Boys and Girls Club sitting on the council and making a decision about how much money the town's gonna give them? I'm not sure that's a good idea.
I agree.
I mean,
So let's
There
not
might
make
be a
the
lot of
other 3 a
citizens
board
that would
member.
there may be
Right.
citizens
Yeah,
out
you
there.
guys are not gonna get on the board.
Well, maybe we should just leave the board. We're exhausted anyway.
You know, I hate that somebody's got ambition to be on the,
I understand.
I mean, it's a fine organization,
Yeah.
but.
Yeah, I
to me,
totally
don't-
agree.
I don't think that's,
Did you say something, Sally?
It was insignificant.
All right.
I said basically that got me off the hook.
All right.
This is heavy stuff, Sally.
Yes,
And speaking of which, I know we got sort of in the weeds on this one policy. Let me go back to so sounds like we do need to hone in on defining some stuff here. And this, we could at least start with this policy. I'll mark it up and think it through. I don't think we're going to do this in one session either, right? So this already says elected officials. So one of my questions on here was, should the council have a code of conduct or a code of ethics that when we do the initial, what do they call it, swearing in with Karen, do we want something like this? Maybe that's a good time for them to review it. Right now, this policy does apply to us. You read that, sign it, and do your swearing in, and not only does Karen ask you if you'll uphold the Constitution, but will you also uphold the Code of Ethics? I think that would be probably a good way to introduce it to new elected officials. Kind of a similar sit down with a new employee, a new appointed member of one of the boards. You know, Paul sits on redevelopment, and he was new to redevelopment at some point. This code of conduct should go in front of him as well as an appointed person. And maybe we have them all sign that they read it. At least we
I
know
agree.
they read it.
I think you should,
Yeah, I don't see a problem.
because
with having them
we
sign
haven't
it.
talked about the
Put it in
processes.
that committee
Yeah.
or commission spot.
We haven't talked about the processes, but, I mean, when I was on the state thing, I always went, well, I didn't know about that. Well, then we'd always whip out their little sheet that said, you said you read the code of ethics when you signed up, and you're supposed to be taking training, and you did take training on this thing. So don't give us this business about you didn't know it. And so away we had at them. And I think that would be a helpful thing so when we get to addressing, behavior inconsistent with the values we got forward, to redress those in the process.
Kind of like ignorance of the law, is no excuse.
Yeah, ignorance of law is no excuse.
Yeah, but to be fair, did you know we had this, Paul, as a redevelopment appointee?
I'll tell you, no, well, what I did know, and the only thing that has ever been quoted or repeated, that unless you're actually receiving money,
Right.
it's okay to do whatever you want to do. And I believe that's a very narrow interpretation to allow people to do a lot of other things. But it was always about personal financial gain was the statement. And, I mean, in interactions, it may not be what's written, but in interactions that I've observed, when we've had ethical conversations about, is this appropriate for me to participate? It was always about, well, I'm not receiving a personal financial gain, so it's okay for me to participate.
Well, and CRC has its own ethical standards in the Indiana
State.
handbook for redevelopment commission members, and it's very detailed about conflicts of interest. I mean, if you want me to read the quote about conflicts of interest, I have it right here. It's very detailed and it's very strict. And Paul was given that book as his standard of conduct. In 2017, it was written and it was recreated in 2020, and it's the only thing about what you guys are talking about. Like, I have ethical standards in my BZA handbook, and it can kick me off if I don't adhere to them. So if you're constructing something, it might be well to at least consider what the other boards have as their standards of behavior, because the CRC's is very, very strict, as it's defined by the state anyway.
Yeah, I think we just have to have some sort of process. You were talking about process, Jim, for when we do bring a new member on, and even for that matter, the old members that get reappointed or whatever, because I don't know that they've all received it. And if it's not in the current handbook that we give them, we should we add it.
Yeah, no, it's
Once
not.
we get it updated. But
Yeah, and right now you hire somebody new as an employee at the street department, you have them sign something that says we reviewed the handbook.
Right.
Yeah.
They're getting it, and like I said, we've had a packet for redevelopment, for plan, for BZA for a long time. I mean, before I started, we had one. But when we updated this and included that language that this was also going to apply to those folks,
it's not been.
no, it
And
didn't.
this isn't
Okay.
in that.
It didn't make it into that book. No,
Well-
that book's been updated, but that.
At
page
least
is
we
not
have
in
a
there.
chance to update this before it goes in that book. So maybe that'd be the goal before January. We any changes we might want to put in this.
Yeah.
And then come January, whoever's appointed across the whole realm of them, some of them, whether they're midterm, we can get this back out to them and be like, hey.
Well, just like we do a conflict of interest statement every year, those boards and commissions that, end on a yearly basis and then re-up, even if you have some of the same people next time around, you got to sign another statement.
I know redevelopment does, the other ones do, right? Or
Not the plan,
just
the
redevelop,
board.
just the ones dealing with money?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if it needs to be the other ones, I will get up to them as well.
No, they don't kind of deal with money.
Well, they all do decisions, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Jenny, I don't remember ever receiving anything when I joined the CRC, but that may have been long enough, may have been just before they.
And it might be because you filled one out for council already.
Yeah, that could be.
Are you talking about the,
I'm referring not to a conflict of interest, but to a book or any
Oh.
information on CRC.
I think for CRC, it's that RAI handbook, Sally, the Redevelopment Association of Indiana. Trying to think what else. I think there were a few other things.
Book and Karen sent out the 2021 earlier this year electronically.
There's an electronic version of it, Sally.
Okay,
I can send it to you.
yeah, that would be good.
Was there anything else in there, Paul, in the whole email list packet? Probably minutes from the last year, that handbook.
The handbook, which we got the 2017 handbook to release. I got that when I joined in 2019.
Yeah.
I received that handbook to read and go through. But I know I got it in the booklet, the binder you handed out. And then I remember signing a statement of identifying any financial interest I had in organizations that may be doing business. Again, it was always about, do I have a direct financial interest?
That's probably state statute that got
Yeah.
kind of
That's when you
emphasized
have
with
conflict of
you.
interest statement.
Yeah, the state statute seems to be the ones people emphasize the most.
And the CRC statute prohibits doing any business ever with CRC. If you're on another board, you are prohibited for doing any business ever. So the CRC definition of conflict is much, much stricter for its own members than what you guys are talking about having a financial interest. And that's why I'm saying kind of what you're talking about is conflicting with some boards that have stricter applications
Mhm.
of the concept of conflict. You're shaking your head, Jim, so I think in that book for redevelopment commission members, I mean, the conflict of interest is so strictly defined. You are never, ever supposed to do it. And it says you can't recuse yourself or disclose. It's not good enough. You cannot ever do business. It's very strict. So it conflicts with kind of what you guys are saying about, personal financial gain. That's just the council.
So they're more restrictive with redevelopment than they are elected officials. The elected officials don't get held to the fire as much, do they?
Well, yeah. And you might have noted in the ethics rules that we're looking at, they have conflict of interest, and then they got decision in voting, and then they have conflict of interest in contracts. And so they even sort of distinguish the voting decision-making process as opposed to, on the other end of it, the contract.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And Bill and Rich, the state ethics thing and the South Bend one, did I send those to you guys, or was that just to Jenny, Karen, and Jim? I don't think I did.
I didn't see it.
Okay, I'll send those to you guys after too, if you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Is this something that we think we have enough confidence to write ourselves, or let the HR manual, and we sort of farm that out to get, I mean, in this case, perhaps, based upon feedback from this discussion and some of the other things and information we have, would be worth engaging somebody whose specialty is writing these types of policies and programs to do a draft for us. Otherwise, I mean, I think it'd be good to have this.
I feel like Jim could do it.
Well,
Just what you wanted though, right?
I didn't suggest that.
Well,
But I mean, if that would be fine, but trying to write it as a committee, I think it would take us a lot of meetings. I think if we could get this done.
And I think you're right. I mean, to get you proposed language, you need to, I think, narrow it to some author to at least throw it out there so that you can make some decisions.
Well, and we're coming up in January with the reappointments for commissions. And so I think it would be good timing to have something in place at that time.
yeah, before we make appointments.
Or when to make appointments, for
So-
the appointments.
Is that person like I can't remember his name, Karen, the HR guy? Mitch? Yeah. Is that, do we want someone with more of an HR specialty or?
Or AIM, or those groups, do you think?
I was gonna say AIM might.
I reached out to AIM when NDOT came out with their statement that we all had to adopt an ethics policy, otherwise we weren't gonna get NDOT funding, and they didn't have a whole lot of guidance for me.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure, I mean, I can reach out to them again and see if they have a suggestion.
You guys are on that thing where, where all these,
The municipal service.
Yeah.
municipal things.
Yeah,
Yeah, we could ask on the serve
Yeah, you might.
list.
ask for, you know, a couple of places to just see what they've come up with.
Yeah, have Karen put a notice out there, and you could put one on the clerk's list too. I bet somebody's done it.
When you were on that state board, I mean, were there people there that you think would do this?
The state's gonna be familiar with the state ethics thing. I don't know that they'd be, you know, it's a little different on a local level. Could I ask them if they'd be interested in writing one on the local level? I could, but.
There are tons of consultants that do consultants for municipal ethics, and I used to do research and I did. So there are tons of, on the municipal level and not the state level, that do consulting and, you know, something like
Yeah,
that.
I think there are some folks that you could find that could do that.
Let's have Karen do something on the listserv for the one that we're allowed on, but also the clerk one that I don't
I
think
know
we're
there was
allowed
a
on.
former,
Maybe not.
Don't blame them.
there was a former town attorney, I don't know if he's still doing it. He started a business and it had things kind of going. And he was doing just not conflict of or ethics things, but he was doing HR kinds of things and a number of things. But I don't know if he still does that stuff or not.
The state's probably gonna say leave it up to the
Yeah,
individual.
but I think there
They're not
are,
gonna wanna get in the weeds because you got, you know, 52 counties and how many cities and towns.
but there are consultants
Right.
that on municipal stuff.
Yeah, I like a lot of what's here in this particular piece, and a long time ago, I looked at some of the CRC stuff because I was trying to figure out what CRC could pay for, what they couldn't pay for, and I was like on this major kick of figuring out TIF dollars. So I know there's definitely strong policy there. Between that and this and state statute, maybe it's a matter of us knowing what's here. Like there's a few things here we all nitpicked apart that need a little work, not a ton. And for the most part, this is pretty solid. This,
Yeah,
the
where'd
redevelopment
this
stuff
come
is
from?
solid,
This
statute is
the,
solid.
Mitch, the HR consultant we used for
Yeah.
the town handbook.
So
That's
he
just
came
right
up
from
with
that.
that.
Yeah.
What would be really effective to me is that, like in January, assuming we can get our own local stuff a little bit more solid, is having an expert do an orientation session, like a Zoom call or virtual call with all the new appointees, new elected, kind of like what AIM does when they offer you this orientation, which by the way, none of this is covered in that. I went to last year's orientation as a consultant, and I went to all the sessions of the newly elected officials. It's like they get in the weeds about weird stuff, like, you know, I mean, they do cover things like whatever you put in an email could become public record and yada, 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 but certainly nothing like this. So what I'm thinking is like in January, if we had an orientation for all these people, this would be just one thing that gets covered. Did you know that the town of Culver has an ethics policy? Also, you're governed by statute. And, you know, we have somebody walk them through a half an hour of that, because I don't want to see any of our appointees get in trouble either, or make us liable for something, you know?
Sure.
I think it's similar to kind of what we tried to do when Jonathan first started, not because Jonathan started, but I think we kind of had that in the works. And it was Mitch came and did those sessions with the council and all the boards and commissions over 2 weekends. I don't know that he got as far in the ethics as our responsibilities, but at least just how each of the individual boards were going to conduct themselves.
I love that idea. Maybe that whoever can help us get this piece in shape could help us with that. And then I think even if it happens once, then the next year you and Jonathan could do it, I'm sure. I mean, you're already doing some orienting with these handbooks.
We recorded it.
Right. That's what I was-
Yeah, record it. Yeah, there
Whenever
you
we get to
go.
do it, it's getting recorded.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Because I mean, we just have to be consistent about it, really.
Does your handbook have a enforcement section in it about violations of the handbook.
For employees, but not for appointees and elected officials.
So how do we handle that?
Well, I guess, well, number one, if you make it to everybody, you just open up the process everywhere. Obviously, there's gonna have to be some tweaks in it, but probably whoever you're gonna get, if you're gonna get somebody to review this part,
Yeah.
they may need to review that part too, to make the adjustments that you may or may not make.
Yeah, that leads us right into, is there a process for us? If I'm like, hey, Bill, you violated 10 of these ethics bullets. Bill might be like, yeah, whatever.
Well.
Like, what's that
at
process
this
look
point,
like?
there's nothing you can do about it.
Right,
And I don't know how far you want to go. I mean, if you make the rules that says you can do something about it as a body, then you might be able to do something about it.
But what does state code say on elected officials?
Elected officials, I mean, you can get elected, you don't have to show up for a meeting.
Right.
Well, that's never happened.
Yeah, that's never happened.
you know, where that isn't, we can do something though with appointees. Like, we could say
Well,
you
can do
violated
something for
12
elected
of these.
officials If you put it in place and everybody says this is what we're gonna do,
Yeah, I like
you could
that.
be more strict.
And right now, we're allowed to do that with appointees. Right.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I think we do need to walk through that process then. How do you file a grievance with an elected official?
And how do the employees do against, other employees? They probably take it to their supervisor.
Yeah.
If it's against their supervisor, they gotta take it to somebody else.
Yeah,
That's
that's
in the
all in
handbook,
there.
right?
all-
Yeah.
That's in there. It's when it's an
That's-
elected official, I don't think.
So if you're gonna try and do something like that, you're gonna have to set that mechanism up.
Okay. It's a lot of work. So we talked about that, process for that, steps, onboarding. Anything else, Jim, that you can think of that we haven't really covered?
Well, I guess, if you're serious about doing something, how do we leave it? Are you gonna try and see if there's a consultant that we wanna talk about looking at and rewriting and updating?
I just sent out an email to the listservs to see if there were any consultants that anyone else had used. So,
Yeah,
And then, maybe, look at a few of them and see who you'd like best, come back with a recommendation as to this is the person and maybe this is what the cost is gonna be and.
yeah.
do some
So
background.
if we were to define the scope of work for that consultant, if Karen puts out a notice and they're asking, what exactly do you want me to do? I think the scope of work is one, review our current policy and make modifications of which we have some input on because we've had some good discussion here about that. Define a process for how we handle when someone violates those codes. We have that process for employees, but maybe they review that too, Karen. Like, review what we currently have,
Make suggestions.
whether
for
it's an
what-
elected official,
Right.
an appointed person, a volunteer, or an employee, as it's
Right.
currently defined in here. And so what would that process be for dealing with somebody who's violated that? That's a starting point at the very least, right?
Sure.
And if also, is there anything missing from our current policy And, you know, if they're reviewing this anyway, they're gonna make some suggestions for that, I would assume. That seems like a scope of work right there. And then also maybe we ask them to go ahead and consider if you were to create a piece of our orientation on ethics for us so that we can onboard new employees, elected officials, and appointed officials. What would that also cost? Like that should be part of the scope of work, right? Yeah. Anything else, you guys, that should be part of that scope?
If there are individual statements in the, like you said, into the planning commission,
Well, I just, in BZA, and also in the Indiana Handbook for Redevelopment Commission members and their attorneys, it's very, very strict, not only about conflicts of interest, but about removal from a redevelopment commission. BZA has the same ones, and the only thing that I would say is that if you're going to somehow separate the council from the other boards, is that at least look at those rules of the other boards.
Yeah.
Because, as I say, the CRC one is very, very, very well defined, very strict. And, you know, maybe you bring that in, you know, you use that language for council. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just saying I knew from when I joined BZA. what the
You're being
rules
held
were.
to a higher standard in some ways than we perhaps are.
Yeah, different, but you know, you could, well, I'm saying if you don't know what the other ones are, you could accidentally create conflicts with
Yeah.
your rules.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
the rules that already
making
exist.
sure that we pull those in.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
consultant is going to
So
review it.
part of that scope should be to review all of them so that we can be somewhat consistent among them. And we can't be inconsistent with statute. Wayne tells us that one all the time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, and I assume anyone an expert on this would know statute, but otherwise they probably shouldn't be our consultant. Anything else within that scope? So we can't make a decision about hiring that person or authorizing Karen to do that till a regular meeting. Just FYI.
Well, let's see what she can come up with first.
I've already sent out the emails.
Do the
so-
research.
Yeah, I mean, she-
Well,
she's
yeah,
gotta go
it's
check the water
it's
to
more a
see what comes
financial
up with.
decision we'll have to make and look at the cost of it.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the consultant's probably done something like this for other communities, and, you know, if they do and they give that reference, and almost look to that city or town. I don't know that we need to, maybe like a city like Carmel may be okay, but I don't know that we, you know, I guess we have to be a little bit, you know, use some common sense as to how small we are as opposed to, you know,
Mhm.
other larger cities.
But that comes into play a lot because people are on multiple boards because we have such a small volunteer community. I mean, we have 14
Yeah,
people.
I mean, in Carmel, you're probably not on multiple boards,
Right.
so
That's true.
if you're looking at, you know, you may use whatever other little small town he's done somewhere as a better example than, you know, something like
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis or Fort Wayne.
Yeah, I'd look for, you know, towns similar to our size, you know, 5,000 and under, you know, something like that.
Well, let me see what comes back.
I understand.
And-
My guess is small towns probably haven't spent a lot of money.
You're
No.
probably
Yeah.
right, but, yeah.
But at least in the meantime, let's have Jonathan and Karen send council. Jonathan was gonna send you the South Bend one.
Right.
Let's also get the BZA one and the redevelopment one in everyone's hands so we can all take a look. If we ultimately can't afford this, I think we could still do it. I mean, with what we've got, we can modify this on
Make some
our own.
tweaks.
Yeah, and if we're looking at January as a deadline, I know we have holidays in there, but at least we could work session again before then.
The one thing we don't have a ton of new appointees this year. I mean, it'd be redevelopment would be all 5 of them, but I don't know if there's that many new people
Beyond.
coming on. that's one thing. The other thing is, I think I asked a similar question earlier on the listserv, and someone suggested just Googling the codes of conduct. So I did, and you can kind of go down a rabbit hole. Because there's a lot of stuff online, like Michigan has a whole code of ethics. The state, the Rifle Town Council was one, it was a code of conduct. That's, I mean, I think that would encompass ethics. But either there was that. So if we don't find somebody, I think there are some out there that, in the words of the Monticello mayor, you can R&D, rip off and I'm not forget what the D stands for, but you know, develop on your own.
Rip off and duplicate.
Thank you, yes. Which, yeah, that's not all that ethical either, but you know, you don't have to redesign the wheel. So there's a lot of stuff out there already that if you just take a little bit of time, you can.
Yeah.
You
And
can
I'm
produce.
sure we're not even following what we currently have.
Mhm.
So we need to know what those documents say. We need to study those pretty well and realize, I didn't even realize to what extent that a lot of this works. I mean, I'm glad our employees have this, but, and I remember when we added elected officials to it, so, but I don't think I'd ever think to be like, hey, Bill, welcome to the council.
Yeah.
So read everything Jonathan sent you, and we can reconvene again after we get some information from Karen on this.
To adjourn?
Yeah.
Work session? That's good.
Yeah. What time are we at?
6:18.
6:20.
Oh, good, okay. Restroom break. Smoke them if you got them. Does anyone want a little bag of Chex Mix?
No, how about a big bit?
There's a snack box here. And there's cuties.